In this session, recorded on May 3rd, Sandra, a new member of our online community, asks about the online course and the workbook that helps her plan her life and achieve more of what she wants. This session is a good overview of how to use the workbook and how to get access to a free preview of the online video course, which is the foundation program of this online community. So how are you doing?
Actually, pretty good. It's been kind of like a thought exercise in a way. I don't have my notebook with me, but the one point in the course that when it and it's it says, what are your goals and the different things, and I'm like, well, I don't know. And then when I like spiritual one, I went, well, how do you have a spiritual goal?
Right.
It's like, well, I don't know. And then the only thing I could think of in terms of is like, well, because I've learned this one particular meditation technique of all the ones I've tried. I like it the best. It's called Ojjayi. And so I thought, well, get back to that. And so I'm like, okay, is that, you know what I mean? So I'm, and one thing that I think the most valuable thing, though, when you said to make a list of things that were successes, what I noticed is most of the things, if not almost all of them, were things that I either didn't think could happen or I had to work harder to get. It's like it took me a long time to get a driver's license. What I was
Right.
like I was in my early 20s before I got a driver's license. And I was living in California, not well-paying job, just struggling to make rent, food, whatever. And the idea of owning a car was just never in my wheelhouse at the time. Of course, now I have a car. I've been through several cars. So it made me think that, or realize that just because something doesn't look possible or attainable, that doesn't mean that they are impossible or unattainable. So it just, and that wasn't until I made the list that I realized that. And
That's good.
yeah. So I was wondering if one of the other fellows, it seems like you have a group that usually meets. I hope I'm not messing up the chemistry of the group.
Yeah, it's probably your fault that they aren't coming. No, I expect I expect 2 or 3 of them to show up today. Michael sent me a message and said he would be late.
Oh, okay.
He was busy at 10 o'clock, but he would be here around 11, I think.
Yeah.
Something like that.
So anyway, so I've been kind of chewing on that idea that, sometimes you don't think something's going to happen or you don't see how it's going to happen.
Right.
But I might take an action and it does happen, or maybe I just delayed taking the action. Like I used to have, like I needed braces, but I didn't get them until I was an adult. My parents had asked me earlier if I wanted them. I said no. So I went through school, with the buck teeth kid, and all that kind of stuff. And then eventually when I was working, I thought, okay, I'm going to get braces. Went around and told all my coworkers, when I come into work tomorrow, I'm going to have, metal on my teeth.
That's cool.
So, yeah. So anyway, so it's been kind of a lot of food for thought.
Well, that's the point, that workbook that you have, I've developed it over the years. I've modified it a little bit, and I use it now for different things than I originally did when I first heard about it or I first got it. But basically, I modeled that after a program that I took from a guy named Paul J. Meyer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you don't know Paul Meyer, you can look him up on the internet. He passed away about 10 years ago, I think, but he was a very successful business person, philanthropist. He gave away millions of dollars in his lifetime, and he was super successful as an insurance salesman, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he created this company called Success Motivation Institute to teach people how to be successful, because he was very successful and he realized, he does things that other people don't do or don't know about. So he started Success Motivation Institute, which became the largest sort of personal development company in the world for quite a while. This is back in the late 50s, 60s, 70s, perhaps. Now, personal development recordings and tapes and things are all over the place, and most of them are on YouTube. You can find it seems like
Mm-hmm.
everything I do a search for on YouTube, there's 10 different channels and 500 videos about it. So
Yeah.
it seems like almost everything is on there, and certainly Paul J. Meyer has a bunch of stuff on there. But anyway, so the idea of that workbook came from this program that I took with Paul J. Meyer, called The Dynamics of Personal Leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if that course is still for sale. It might be, because he started a couple of companies, and Success Motivation Institute, I think, has kind of morphed into another company or another series of companies. It's still around, and they do training, for business executives and things like that. But so that's where I got the workbook from. And so it was mostly, as far as I was concerned, this is what it seemed to me, that it was mostly focused on achieving your goals. Oh, here's Michael now. Michael's here
Yeah.
earlier. I got an email from him saying, "Oh, I won't be there for, I'll be late." Um, so at any rate, so I always looked at that workbook as a way to focus your mind and achieve more goals, right? And so the idea of the goal setting aspect of it, what are your goals, and long-term goals, short-term goals, and things like that. Hi, Michael.
Hi,
Do you know Sandra?
hi, Senator. I remember from last time.
Yeah. Um, Greg apparently can't be here today. So at any rate, getting back to this workbook. So this was in the late 60s, right? I signed up for that course in, I believe, 1969, something like that. And it was $750,
Well.
which today would be around $3,500. So it was very
Mm-hmm.
expensive. It was very
Mm-hmm.
expensive. And so I was motivated to take that course, right? And to use it, because I wanted to be more successful, change my life. And so I started playing with that workbook, and the idea was, and I talked about this last week, but I haven't posted the video yet. I'm still finalizing it, so you'll see it maybe later on today or tomorrow or something. I'll put it up there. But Paul Meyer says, if you're not achieving the success that you want, it's because your goals are not clearly enough defined. And Napoleon Hill, if you've heard of a book called Think and Grow Rich, he says he's famous for this statement: what you can conceive and believe you can achieve. So I sort of started with that idea of what you can conceive and believe you can achieve. And I thought, well, what does it mean to conceive? And I realized Well, conceiving means you have to have a picture of it. You have to have a concept of it, right? And what does it mean to believe? Well, believe means you have to believe that you can do it, or that you're worthy of it, or it's possible. You know, it's possible to do it. It's possible for me to do it. If it's possible for someone to do it, theoretically, it's possible for me to do it if I just do what they do. You know, this is what Anthony Robbins says, you know, success leaves clues. So if you copy what somebody else has done, then you'll be able to do what they do. And what I've realized over the years is that the thing that you need to copy oftentimes is their attitude, their beliefs, their mindset, you know, how they think, right? So so this workbook had these 6 different categories of goals in it, right? You know, physical, mental, spiritual, financial, family, and social, right? And so Sandra was asking about a spiritual goal, like, you know, she never thought about it too much before. So that's a good question. I'm not sure what a spiritual goal might be, you know, but so those 6 categories, those were things that Paul Meyer was interested in. He called that the whole person concept, you know, and he said you should have goals in all different areas of your life. So you can adjust those labels any way you want, really. But it's a good, you know, it's a good place to begin. So he was quite a religious person, and he gave a lot of money to churches, and he endowed, you know, university chairs in various different subjects and things. So he had a very spiritual purpose, right? Spiritual meaning, I assume that it was the right thing to do. You know, it was the moral, ethical thing to do. You know, if God has given me these gifts, you know, that I should use these gifts for the good of other people, you know, which is very similar to the Buddhist idea that I want to become enlightened and use my enlightenment to the benefit of other people. So it's very similar, right? But he wasn't a Buddhist; he was a Christian, as far as I know. And so, but the key to that workbook is that you use it. Because, you know, if you read sort of success literature, which I read probably 100 books on how to be successful, you know, over the years, right? And pretty well all of them talk about goals. You have to have a goal. Step 1 is a goal. You have to have a goal, you know. So what's a goal? Well, what I determined after a while is that a goal is basically a decision. So, for example, I could say, well, you know, if I listed 10 different countries that I would like to visit, you know, I could put them on a sheet of paper and say, okay, I'd like to visit all these countries. Now, that would be what I would call a dream. So a dream, to me, is an idea of something that you want. Period. That's what it is, you know. And the difference between a dream and a goal is that a goal, you decide you're going to do it, you know. Like if I say, oh, yeah, I'd like to go to France, you know. Well, if one day I say, okay, I'm going to go to France, I'm going to decide to go, you know. And a goal, I say this in my book, has 4 characteristics to it. It's clear, like Napoleon Hill says, you know, you can conceive it. You have a time limit for it. You have a plan to achieve it. And you're taking steps now to do it. You're doing something now. Now, to me, meaning today. You do something today. It's in the present, right? Because everything comes down to our thoughts. And so what I've come to believe is that there's only 2 times. There's now, and there's outside of now. This is how I think the mind works, you know. So Now can be like now is now today. It's physical reality today, right? So now here I am. I'm sitting having this Zoom call with you guys. And so what I came to realize after using that workbook over and over again, just religiously, sort of for years, and I still do it pretty well every day. I work in it, and so what I realized over the years was that if I have a goal that I'm working on, that I'm motivated to achieve, and I'm clear about what it is and why I want it, and I have the right attitude. These are the 5 laws of success, right? MAGIC. So I'm motivated, I have the right attitude, I have a clear goal, I'm using my imagination in a positive way to see myself achieving it, And then the third part is the last one is consciousness, which is sort of what's the mind and how does it work, right? Which is a big issue. So what I realized was that working in the workbook, and as you started to say when we first started talking here 15 minutes ago or something, as you play around with those worksheets, why do I want this? What's the benefit? What's the payoff? What's the payoff for me? What's the payoff for me physically? What's the payoff financially? What's the payoff emotionally? What's the payoff in my relationships? What's the payoff for my kids, my grandkids? What's the payoff spiritually? What's the payoff socially? Well, if I achieve my goal, I'll be able to contribute more to my church, something like that. So the more you think about those worksheets and the more ideas you sort of put on there, like Napoleon Hill says, you get to conceive it in a really systematic way. And Paul Meyer says, if you're not as successful as you want to be, it's because your goals are not clearly enough defined. So there's almost no limit to how defined and how clear you can become in all of those areas: motivation, attitude, beliefs. So in the fall of 2022, I made a decision I was going to go to England, right? And that was it. I just said, okay, I'm going to go to England, because I was born there and I hadn't been back to England for years. So I thought I'd like to go to England. And I decided I wanted to visit the house that I lived in when I was a kid with my family, because I left there when I was 2. So that became a goal, right? And so the goal started with a decision. I'm going to do it. I'm going to take my wife and we're going to go to England next year, right? And so as the time came for us to leave, I spent more and more time on the internet looking for hotels, looking for trains, looking for places to visit. How do I get there? I made some reservations in hotels and those kind of things. So getting back to Paul Meyer again, your goal is not clearly enough defined. When my goal was I want to go to England next year, that was a pretty fuzzy concept. But by the time the day came for me to get on the plane and fly to England, I not only knew when I was going, where I was going, what hotel I was going to go to when I arrived in London, how long I was going to be there. I had already bought tickets for different things I wanted to visit in London, so there was more and more and more and more detail. That's my point, right? And so I think that's what Paul Meyer was talking about. It's because your goals are not clearly defined. Because if any step of your plan is fuzzy, you can mess it up or you can make a wrong decision, right? For example, if I had a plan to get on the train to go to a certain place on my schedule, and I thought the train left at 10, and the train actually left at 9:30, and I arrived at the train station at 9:30, it's like, oh, I missed my train, right? I failed in the sense. I failed to make the train. So not only does your goal, does your plan have to be detailed as infinitely fine detail as you can make it, but it needs to be accurate too. And as a matter of fact, one of the things I was going to talk about today, and I'll get to it later, is when you believe something that isn't true, right? You can believe it, you can act on it, you can, design your life around it, and then you find, then you realize, hey, it's not true. So, so anyway, that's the workbook. The more you work in the workbook, the better. And so when you mentioned past successes, now I'm not sure if Paul Meyer used that past successes worksheet. I think he did. I think it was one of the worksheets in the original workbook was the past successes. But my journey, and I think about my dream and having the dream come true, sort of thing. You know that story. So what happened was, at a certain point, I realized that I was doing meditation, and at one time I spent 2 months every day, 10 or 15 minutes, remembering my 10th year, because I realized at one point I can't remember anything about my childhood. I had this real negative attitude about my childhood. I had a lot of anger and frustration about, school and the church and my parents and, how I sort of was misunderstood and, whatever. I just had a real chip on my shoulder. And so I thought, this isn't healthy. It's probably not even accurate. So I decided to go back and remember my 10th year. And so I did that. And it took a while, but I ended up getting more and more and more ideas of a positive nature about my childhood, right? And I realized, man, this is amazing to me. Number one, that all this information is still there. I could remember, my friends in school, like I was in grade 5 at the time, I think. I remembered my friends and how we used to play games, and I remembered the parents and some of their pets. I remembered the cars that their parents used to drive. I remembered some of their phone numbers, some of their addresses. It just blew my mind how much information was there, right? Still there. I could go back in my mind and I could remember all this stuff. And every day I did this mental exercise of going back in my mind and visiting this summer when I was 10, right? And at some point I remembered having that dream. And it was like, that blew my mind, because I had forgotten that dream. I mean, I didn't really forget it because it motivated me from then on. But it, it sort of morphed into becoming a whip, and a spur. Like, it was positive and it was negative, and it caused me to be excited and then to be depressed because I thought I wasn't going to achieve it, and then it kind of morphed into having a different meaning than I thought it did originally. And, so I was always sort of driven by that dream, but I had forgotten actually when I had it. And so one of the things I remember doing this meditation exercise was I remembered having that dream, and it was like, that answered my big question, which was, how is it possible to know the future in advance? And I realized nobody questions the fact that here I am at 32, I can remember my 10th year, because everybody knows you have information from the past. But everybody says, at least this is what I thought at the time, everybody says, and I believed, you can't have any information about the future because the future hasn't happened yet. So how can you have a memory of the future? It's nobody knows the future. Everybody says that. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Well, I realized that's false. We have lots of information about the future. Like if I ask you, for example, where are you going to sleep tonight? You get, there's a pretty good chance already, right? That's the future. And so anyway, so that was a huge breakthrough for me, because what I realized was my understanding of what memory is completely wrong. And as a matter of fact, everybody's wrong about it. As a matter of fact, I'm going to a conference next week with a group of scientists and psychologists and graduate students, PhD students, all about memory, and I'm really excited to meet some of these people, because people have been studying, people are now studying memory in a big way, right? But they don't know what I know, which is that memory is a connection, right? And so at any rate, so that answered my question. How is it possible for a 10-year-old guy to know his future in advance? And I realized it's because it's the flip side of a dream. It's the flip side of a memory, right? So at 32, I'm thinking of my 10-year-old, we call that a memory. But at 10 years old, if I'm thinking of the 32-year-old, what do you call that? Well, I called it a dream because that was the word that I knew. It was a dream, but it was kind of a strange dream. I mean, it felt when it first happened, it felt very real and very different, right? So now I explain it by saying, well, it's a connection. You know, the 32-year-old and the 10-year-old were connected. Now I had the dream when I was asleep at 10 years old, which makes sense because it was part of my subconscious, right? So anyway, so getting back to the workbook. So this idea of past successes, what I realized with Paul Meyer's workbook, and I don't recall him ever saying this. I don't remember him saying that the past successes would empower you, though he might have said, I can't remember. But at any rate, what I realized was, the reason you want to write your past successes is because if thinking is a connection, if memory is a connection, then you want to tap into the energy around that success. Like you pointed out a minute ago, Sandra, you know, a lot of the successes that you were writing down were things that you originally thought maybe weren't possible, and you overcame some resistance and you achieved them. And so that kind of energy is very important, right? Because you can tap into it right now. And if you think about one of those past successes and you really get into it and you meditate and you visualize and you get, you know, all your inner senses working on it, you will get the message like, hey, you know, I achieved that when I didn't think it was possible. I can achieve this if I don't think it's possible, you know. So it kind of empowers you in the present. So to me, that's the value. That's one of the values of that past successes list, which is something that I don't think I ever heard Paul Meyer say anything like that, because of course, you know, maybe he knew it intuitively, but at that time, we're talking the 60s and 70s, nobody was saying that memory is a connection. You know, as a matter of fact, nobody's saying it now, as far as I know, except me. But I'm going to try and tell my story, at least, you know, to some of these students and professors that I'm going to meet in about 5 days. So, and just to kind of reflect the other side of it, what I realized was, okay, if memory is a connection, then a goal is a connection too. That's why every book I ever read about how to be successful always talked about goals. You have to have goals. You know, Anthony Robbins says a goal is the first step in making the invisible visible, which is absolutely true. So your goal, like my goal of going to England, you know, now it's a memory, but in 2022, it was a dream or a goal. And when it happened, I was fully conscious of the fact that I was now living physically the reality that I visualized 6 months previous. Like I went to visit the house that I was living in with my parents when I was 2 years old. And I met the guy that lives there now. And, you know, I had pictures of me in the house and I was like physically here. So that was the goal, right? And of course, that's what a goal is. A goal is a connection to a possible future. And you know that map of inner space-time that we have in the workbook there, and it's in my book too. That's a positive possibility in the future, right? So this idea of being connected to a positive past that you can tap into and get energy from. And the way I look at it is like an oil well, you know, a company will spend millions of dollars finding oil. And the reason they want to find the oil is because when they tap into it, they can pump it out for years and sell it and make money for, you know, decades, maybe, right? Look at Saudi Arabia. So to me, that's what a past success is, you know. And some of my past successes, you know, that I've thought about, I mean, I have tapped into them for power hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of times. like quitting smoking for me was a big thing that I did when I was around 35. And I have used the fact that I overcame my smoking to empower me for years ever since then. If I did that, I can do this, which is what I'm going to talk about a little bit later, but we'll get to that in a minute. So, so that past success list is really powerful and important, and the goals list is also important. So when you open the binder, I think one of the first worksheets in there is the dream list, master dream list, and that is literally where you just put anything down that you think you might want. It doesn't matter what it is, how crazy or how impossible or how distant or whatever it might be. It starts from there, and at some point, when you think about some of those dreams, you might find yourself going, well, geez, if this seems like such a good idea and it interests me so much, maybe I should set it as a goal. Maybe I should do it, writing a book, taking a trip around the world, whatever it might be for you, right? So that workbook is about using the past and using the future to create more of the life that we want. That's the idea behind, the life design concept of it, the mental magic life design workbook. You design the life and then you create it, right? And just one final thought here before I open the floor for comments is now I lost my train of thought there. You see, I was going to say something and now it's gone. Funny how that happens. Oh yeah, I know what I was going to say. That your mind is a fractal, right? So in other words, I can use that trip to England as a perfect example. And I did this because I talked about it for 6 months before I went. And I've been talking about it for the last 18 months or so since I came back. So having a goal, motivating yourself to achieve the goal, planning the goal, achieving the goal, experiencing the goal, milking the goal for what it's worth, and then using that as a past success to empower yourself in the present. That is exactly what you do, from what I've heard, 50,000 times a day. But we're not conscious of it. These are what they call thoughts, right? But for example, if you think about, going downtown to get your hair done, for example, it's exactly the same process. First of all, it's an idea. And then you go, okay, well, I better set an appointment then. I'll, call my barber or my hairdresser and make an appointment. So, when's the next Tuesday at 3:00? That works for me, and make an appointment. Then you go downtown, you have your hair done, you come back, So literally every single day, that process of having a fuzzy idea about something, deciding to do it, doing it, and then remembering it after you did it. That's how the mind works to me. That's like the basic function. That's what thinking is. Using your inner senses in the past and in the future, right? As a contrast to using your outer senses, which is getting information from the physical world, which is very limited because now I can see my living room and out the window, and I can see partly into the kitchen. That's the limit of my world physically at the moment. But internally, I can remember, being a kid. I can remember being in England. I can remember being in university, and I can anticipate I'm going to China in a couple of months. So I can anticipate going to China and what I'm going to do in China when I get there. So like with my inner senses, my thinking, I'm tapping into the future, exploring the past, exploring the future, all the time. And that's what all of us do. It's called thinking. Now, this is relatively new. Since about 1995, scientists have realized this, that memory is a thought process that works in the future too. They call it future memory, or they call it mental time travel. And what the psychologists now label it is the default mode. They say this is the default mode of your mind. Close your eyes, pay attention to what happens. Your mind's going past, present, all over the place, right? Now here comes Michael now. So so that workbook is really key to organize your thinking and organize your plans and things like that. And when you remember a past success, realize the energy that's available in that past success, like the oil from an oil well. It's always available. All you have to do is think about the past success, put your mind back there, and you can experience that emotion, that feeling again, Join us in this online community for $1 a day. You get your own PDF copy of the book upon which this entire training series is based. 2 powerful meditation recordings, this Design Your Life workbook, and a 4-hour video course that tells you how to use it to change your life step by step. Go to learntodesignyourlife.com.